This is BBC Radio Wales. Yesterday, footage was released of the UKIP MEP Godfrey Bloom saying this.
How we can possibly be giving £1 billion a month when we're in this sort of debt to Bongo Bongo land is completely beyond. To buy Ray-Ban sunglasses, apartments in Paris, Ferraris, and all the rest of it goes with most of foreign aid.
So originally he was unrepentant about his comments about Bongo Bongo land, said he was merely speaking for ordinary people. However, since then Mr Bloom has apologised, says he sincerely regrets any offence or embarrassment he may have caused. So were you offended by his comments? He claims that he was speaking for ordinary people. Was he speaking for you? Do you think that this country, Great Britain, gives far too much aid to foreign countries? Do let me know what you think. The lines are open if you want to have your say on Godfrey Bloom. 8 10 12 on the text. You can email jason@bbc.co.uk and via Twitter @BBC Radio Wales. 03700 100 110. My team are here, ready to take your calls. Already, the texts and emails have been flying in since we told you that this was going to be on the show at 12 o'clock today. David in Ruthin on the email. Jason, even the backwards time travellers of UKIP are entitled to their views, but people like Bloom are certainly not entitled to express their views in the way he did. The whole thing has been aggravated by his revelling in the use of the terminology he employed. Roger says, looks like so-called free speech is completely dead in this country. However, I fully agree with the context of what Mr Bloom is saying. And Fred says, Jason, in the words of Sir George, the homeless of this country, you step over them when leaving the opera. Charity begins at home. Let's find out what Jane Brencher thinks. Jane's a charity worker for Pont, a small Welsh charity that works in Africa. Hello, Jane. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Jason.
Raheem Kassam joins us, who's a founder and editor of the political website Trending Central. Raheem, good afternoon to you. Welcome to BBC Radio Wales. Jane, first to you, how did you feel when you heard his comments?
Disbelief, then outrage, and then I think pity. Because that's the sort of comment you would maybe have associated in the old colonial days. People sipping their gin and tonic while they watch the poor people work themselves to death. He is a dangerous person, though, because that outrageous comment that he made, and I don't want to repeat that over the air, was mixed up with some actually quite interesting points that people do need to engage with. And that makes him even more dangerous.
This is from Zoe Williams. She wrote a very interesting piece in The Guardian today, saying it isn't enough to dismiss talk of Bongo Bongo land as silly but amusing. The assumptions behind it need a sharp rebuttal. She also goes on to say that we should not tolerate bigots like Godfrey Bloom. Raheem, do you believe that Mr Bloom is a bigot?
No, I don't. And I think this this sort of faux outrage around the word Bongo Bongo land is really reprehensible. I mean, there's been some point scoring over this stuff. People, will say what they will because Mr Godfrey Bloom's a UKIP MEP. I couldn't care less. A lot of people in my lifetime have been quite racist to me, but the words Bongo Bongo land don't offend me. It's a catch-all term that he was using flippantly, that he was using, in a tongue-in-cheek manner, not to describe any race or any colour of people or from any country, but just as a sort of catch-all term to mean that we shouldn't be giving money away to, far reaches of the globe when we have our own problems in this country, which we do.
So what was your reaction when you heard Bongo Bongo land? Did you laugh? Did it make you angry in any way?
Well, like Jane said, it was disbelief, but my disbelief wasn't from that he said it. My disbelief was from the outrage that resulted from it. I mean, I can't believe that people can get so angry about a tongue-in-cheek comment. I mean, Jane, my question to you is that if you sort of speak to anyone, of my background, anyone sort of who is, of an immigrant background, and I've spoken to lots of them about this, nobody cares. Why are you so angry about it?
I'll tell you why, is because I spent the last year of my life in the sort of area that he was trying to refer to with that term. And I was working with some very intelligent, focused, desperate, but very sincere people. And that terminology was trying to apply to them. And what it did was, if you're not offended, I'm very pleased that you're not offended, but I can tell you that they would be offended because it minimalizes them. It puts them into, almost like a cartoon character image of what Africa is like. And that is not what Africans are like. It's one of the fastest growing economies of the world. These people are desperate and they're desperate to help themselves. By referring to them in some sort of 18th century language, which is frankly, to my friends and the ones I know and still work with in Africa, I find insulting.
So the people that you're working with right now, have you spoken to them about Godfrey Bloom's comments?
I've had some conversations with some of the people here in Wales,
Yeah.
and they were absolutely appalled. But they were again appalled, not for themselves, but for our friends. These people deserve our respect.
You can't be offended on behalf of someone else. That's just ludicrous.
Well, actually, I disagree with that, and we won't go down the pedantics. I would be very offended on behalf of the Jews that suffered in Auschwitz, very much so, and I don't think anybody would criticise me for that. We can be offended when we are offended for our friends.
Raheem, do you want to come back?
Well, I would probably say that you can be offended if somebody makes an anti-Semitic comment. But what I've said already is that this wasn't a racist comment. You've inferred that he was speaking about Africa. It was my inference from his speech that he was just talking about foreign aid in general. And I think he's made and raised, I think you would agree, a very good point about the efficiency of foreign aid abroad. And if anything, this is thrust into the limelight why British taxpayers are paying for schemes around the world that are often funding lobbyists, that are often corrupt, that are producing iPods for people halfway around the world as some sort of incentive to be a friend of Britain. That's not what British taxpayer money should be doing.
Well, that's a really good point. I'm so glad you brought this up, Raheem, because I just want to move away from the offensive nature of what Mr. Bloom has said. He said this straight-talking approach goes down well with a large proportion of voters who feel unrepresented by other political parties. Let's just shift away from whether people were offensive by the use of Bongo Bongo land, and let's focus on foreign aid. Because I tell you something, Jane, the people who are contacting this programme are saying, OK, I disagree with the way Mr. Bloom spoke about the countries that are getting aid from this country, but they understand the sentiment behind it.
And that's exactly...
That they're frustrated by this country's policy on international aid.
Yeah, and actually that was the point I made in my opening statement. What he's done is he's opened up a debate which needs to be had. And let's be realistic. He went on to talk about F-18s to Pakistan. Good heavens, I don't think anybody would disagree that we need to look at that. That's ludicrous. But let's draw a distinction here, a clear distinction. There are people in this world that are in desperate need. We live in a global village. We cannot be naive, because when elsewhere in the world people are starving and dying of preventable diseases, it is not only morally our responsibility, but actually it impacts on us in terms of regional and global insecurity. So let's have a grown-up debate about it. And when you say about helping people, there's the moral imperative. We cannot allow children to be dying in a world where actually we're overeating to the extent that we're probably killing our own children.
But Jane and Raheem, we have children living in poverty in this country.
And I have devoted most of my life to teaching those children and supporting those children, and still do. And most of the people who engage with my charity, PONT, which is part of the Wales for Africa programme, is very much based on the idea that we help our communities, and as a result of helping people there, in Uganda in particular with ours, we're actually strengthening our own community, doctors, midwives, teachers and so on. So actually, let's not be naive about this one. It's not a purely selfish act, is it? Aid, international aid. It's a very practical moral stance that every country should be taking, every civilised country.
Let's go to the lines. Let's go to Brian in Fridvellen. Brian, good afternoon to you.
Hello, Jason.
Good afternoon. Are we spending too much on foreign aid?
It depends what you're spending it on. As I spoke to your lady earlier, I don't think we should be sending it to India when India's got a space program and we haven't. I would rather see it went to the right people. I've got a granddaughter out in Kenya at the moment. For the last 3 years, owing to support from her parents and myself and my wife and one small charity, she's gone out there and has lost money on doing it for 3 years. This is the last year, because this is the year when the children she started with will be facing their final exams. So what I would say is that, if you're going to send it at all, then make sure it's going to the right places. There's another thing. I often listen to Radio 5 at night, and after 10:30, and they've dealt with the sport, they often have phone-in programs, and I hear far too many people phoning up. I'm not saying that because I think they're complaining unnecessarily, phoning up, and they seem to be in real poverty. Now, I can't tell from their accents what they are. They just sound English, okay? And you can't really tell what colour they are, and it doesn't really matter. They seem to be in real poverty, and they're real in poverty here. Now, I'm not in poverty because I've got an old age pensioner. My wife's got an old age pension. I've also got an occupational pension, which I'm thankful to say nobody stole.
And you strongly believe, Brian, that money should be spent here. Let's not beat about the bush here. Let's not beat about the bush here.
If it's really £1 billion a month, as I'm saying, that we should be careful about where we send it.
Right, okay.
And perhaps not give it to governments.
Okay, let's not beat about the bush here. In a word, I'm going to ask you whether Godfrey Bloom was right.
Well, I think he was in many ways. I don't think the Bongo Bongo land counts because the sort of idiot thing you might get in some silly a story,
yeah.
You know, because it doesn't actually define any particular country or, for that matter, continent either.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. That's Brian in Rhyd Valyn. Lots of people contacting the programme today about this story. This is Harry in Neath, who says the UKIP politician involved is certainly no candidate for the diplomatic service. However, his point is sound. Only our posh political masters could give 11 billion quid away to overseas countries, some of which are nuclear powers. And they also have a dubious human rights record, while many people in the UK are experiencing hard times. David in the Vale of Glamorgan is our next caller. David, hello.
Good morning, Jace.
Offended by Bongo Bongo land?
Well, totally offensive, but not incorrect in as much the sentiment as the chap from Nice said before. I spend a lot of time travelling the world, and I see these people, and I actually talking to some in Amsterdam recently, a couple of chaps from Tanzania, and they were openly boasting about the way they get money off the government. All the governments give them money. It was quite surprising to hear. The chap, Bloom, who made those comments, well, you know, nobody would surely make a comment like that if it had a political future. But nevertheless, he's totally correct. You know, when you see people in hospitals not getting operations, when you see the health service falling apart, when you see the police being cut back, why are we doing this to ourselves? We should be trying to rebuild the nation, not support others, as the other guy said, have nuclear weapons.
Thank you very much indeed, David in the Vale of Glamorgan. You see, Jane Brencher, what Mr. Bloom has done, OK, many people disagree with the way he went about it, but people, and I'm not surprised by this because over the past 3 years I've been hosting this show, people have become increasingly concerned about the amount of money that's being thrown at these countries.
And I think that's a critical argument that we should be having. But if I can illustrate it with a very, very short story, something that happened with me. I was in Gulu in the north of Uganda, which had a terrible war with the Lord's Resistance Army. I was walking down the street with one of our project workers. Bear in mind that our people pay for their own flights and there are no overheads in Pont. What you pay is what you get. And the newspapers on the stand said that British government aid had been stopped to Uganda because of corruption. And I turned to Pastor James and I said, oh, I'm really sorry. He said, no, absolutely the right thing to do because that money never gets to us. So let's draw a distinction here, Jace, between the people in need on the ground and the very, very good charities, not just mine, but the others that feed through directly. And the money that government, there are political reasons sometimes why governments give money to corrupt governments. I totally abhor that. But there's a big distinction to be made. And actually, what sort of country do we want to live in where we don't care about anybody else?
It's a good question.
Is that really the sort of world
question.
our kids want to be brought up in?
It's a really good question, Raheem. You know, the amount of texts that are coming in, I cannot keep up with the amount of texts of people saying, I completely agree with Mr. Bloom, okay, I don't like the way he expressed it in that speech, but they completely understand what he's trying to say. But at the same time, we have to ask, what sort of country do we want to be?
Well, I think to pick up on something that Jane said earlier, you know, we really have to consider this from a grown-up perspective. And I think any grown-up listening to that speech can tell the difference between, you know, what he was saying and how he was presenting it. I think as the callers have rightly isolated there in their comments. The country that we want to live in is a country whereby, you know, we look after, you know, the people in this country who are living in poverty and in abject poverty, you know, tackling diseases here and also committing what we can to people who are suffering abroad. But if you take one example, for instance, a meningitis B jab that has been in development in this country for I think over 20 years, and we still don't have it on the NHS. People are still not able to get it, and there are almost 2,000 people dying every year in this country from the disease. Now, one might say that you can take the aid budget and look at that and look at how we can actually save lives in this country, save British lives in this country, just by issuing the jabs to children here. So I think there is obviously this very significant and serious trade-off that we need to consider. And again, it comes down to morality. And I think there is an element of Western guilt that we somehow owe things to people abroad more than we owe to ourselves because of our colonial history or something like that. And that's what we're getting into here. But I think, again, just to stress lastly, the bongo bongo things. I mean, if you really are to take offense at that, then presumably you would take offense when walking through a supermarket and seeing umbongo on the shop shelves. There is a commonly known product that is using that, in inverted commas, racial epithet. Are we offended at that? I don't think so.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We have to leave it there. Jane, thank you very much. Thank you to Jane Brencher. Thank you to Raheem Kassam. Yargo in Pontypridd on the email. Jason, your panelist stated you cannot be offended on behalf of someone else. Of course you can. If someone made a sexist comment towards women, I, as a man, would get offended. Jane Brencher is correct. We must look at foreign aid. There is no reason why the UKIP politician had to use the words that he did. Geraint in Wrexham says, I'm fuming. Why don't they give money to our councils instead so that they don't have to cut services? Look after your own first. I've got an autistic child and Wrexham have cut the play schemes this week. Thank you. Keep them coming. 8, 10, 12 on the text. My word, a lot of you are angry today. Jason at bbc.co.uk on the email 1225.